What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the AlbumReview.net podcast. I'm Greg Potters. Thanks to all you listeners out there for your interaction and feedback. Your feedback is much appreciated and it helps me to always improve. Today's theme is risk, chance, gambling, betting, and of course, rekindling my love of an old album. So thanks for listening. On today's episode, I'm joined by musician and film editor who works regularly with actor Benicio del Toro, my oldest friend in the world, Zack Stoff. Zack also has experience as a member of the Ry Cuming band, now called Ry X. He was the bass player, and Zack and Ry were the opening band for Maroon 5 during their 2010 US tour. So in many, many ways, I think Zack is qualified to talk about music. Not to mention, he's also my oldest friend in the world of 46 years. And in this episode, Zack and I break down the very first Rush album that we bonded to, 1991's Roll the Bones. If you listen to a previous episode, episode number 28, Zack and I reviewed Rush's 1978 masterpiece, Hemispheres. Zack also joined me way back on episode 6 for a deep, deep review of Frank Zappa's Hot Rats. So after listening to this, I encourage you to go back and check those out as well. Remember, you can read my reviews and listen to any of my podcast episodes by going to albumreview.net. These episodes can also be heard wherever podcasts are available. Please follow the podcast on your preferred platform so you can get regular updates on new episodes. And also, if you guys would be so kind as to pop a quick review or rate the podcast, that helps move the needle and get the word out there. In addition to listening, if you like reading, you can check out over 50 written reviews at albumreview.net and pick up some merchandise from your favorite bands. I also have the bookstore where you can check out music autobiographies, in addition to the many books published by authors that I've had here on the show. When you're visiting albumreview.net, be sure to also check out the store. I've got a wide variety of items for purchase there. You can pick yourself up items such as trucker hats, t-shirts, several of your favorite albums, as I mentioned, but we've also got home sound systems in addition to books that I highly, highly recommend. All right, let the gambling begin. Please enjoy this episode, a full review of Rush's 1991 album, Roll the Bones. The element of chance. What does this mean? Nothing in life is certain, but there is always this existing element of chance. For when someone takes a chance, there is no way to know for sure whether it will pay off or not. Some believe no matter what you do, if it's not going to hurt too much, you should always take that chance. Some disagree and rarely take chances. Others are more calculated and take chances only after they feel comfortable with their own personal risk assessment. But due to the random nature of the world around us, there is no way that someone can properly determine what their chances of something are. All right, I suppose a statistician, I got it. I nailed it. A statistician could spend weeks collecting data, then present their hypothesis. But doesn't taking that road lead you right back to the question in mind? Do I take a chance or not? The element of chance was the initial theme drummer and lyricist Neil Peart was going for when he first picked up a pen to write lyrics for their 1991 album, Roll the Bones. And so joining me today is a good friend, an old friend, best friend, Zack Stoff, who was previously, well, he's been on several episodes of the pod, but the last one was when we went through Rush's Hemispheres, and we're going to get into this one today. So, Zack, buddy, thanks again for joining, man.
Yeah, man, it's great to be here. It's so much fun. So excited for this.
From Altadena, California, Zack and I grew up listening to Rush together, and we're going to get into all of this. Zack is the reason, Zack and his brother Jason are the reason that I even fell in love with the band. So the band, for those of you who don't know, Rush, the trio who got their start in Ontario, Canada in the late 1960s, they were coming off a successful world tour for their 1989 album, Presto. The band enjoyed the Presto tour so much when it completed in mid-1990 that they cut their vacation time short to start writing and recording their next album, which would be their 14th studio album. Bassist and lead singer Geddy Lee wanted to implement stronger vocal melodies in each song, and he wanted to base the instruments and writing around those. So if you guys are familiar with early Rush from the 1970s, most of the albums consist of Lee's screeching vocal range partnered with lengthy instrumentals. And throughout the 1980s, their music was more representative of the genre happening at the time, music consisting of synthesizers, electric drums, bad hair, and really bad freaking outfits. So for Roll the Bones, the album continues moving in the same direction as with Presto. Less of those 80s synths and more guitar and distortion. And like most Rush albums, Lee and guitarist Alex Lifeson focused on writing their music with drummer Neil Peart writing the lyrics, which a lot of Rush fans already know. And when Rush's original drummer, John Rutsey, decided to quit the band in 1974, Peart auditioned to replace him, and it only took Lee and Lifeson about 1 minute to decide that Neil was the right fit. In addition to his exceptional drumming, it was clear to Geddy and Alex early on that Neil was also incredibly verbose. He read a lot and displayed a strong sense of awareness, sensitivity, and intelligence. And this was so apparent that Lee and Lifeson later asked Neil to write most of the lyrics for what would be their next album, 1975's Fly By Night. And the writing continued throughout the remainder of Rush's career. So, Zack, can you remember the first time that you heard this album and sort of how you heard it? Like, was it introduced to you? Did you stumble across it?
Oh man, yeah. One of the things that struck me when I just love the beauty of doing these podcasts is that you just get to dive back into this, these albums and just and live it like you've been doing for the whole time you've been doing these. But for your guests, like for myself, it's like, all right, cool. I'm going to listen to Roll the Bones on repeat for like a week or two now, and in the car. And so, as I do here in LA, like we all listen to everything in the car. But it is nice to listen to albums like blared in your car, especially when you're stuck in traffic.
Oh yeah.
So that's been my reality the last week or so, listening to Roll the Bones. And one of the things that struck me on it was how that it came out earlier than I thought. It came out in, I guess, 91, and we were freshmen in high school at that time.
We were 14 years old in the fall of 91.
So we were just starting freshman year, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
So certainly there was like a correlation there with sort of starting high school.
Oh yeah.
I mean, discovering many things, but also, discovering Rush from my brother, as you mentioned, who is a guitar player, and at that time played a lot of these Rush songs over and over again, just learning them, and was really into them. And back when in the world of CDs and tapes and tape mixes, and I just would constantly hear Rush coming out of his room and guitar licks over and over again, trying to get them right and not really knowing where they came from until years later when I'm listening to the music and I'm like, oh, so that's what he was trying to play.
Right.
So I definitely had the advantage of getting introduced to a lot of this through him. So it was through mixtapes and stuff where you don't necessarily know what albums these songs come from.
Right.
I would say Roll the Bones being the latest album that they had at the time that we got into them, it made sense that album was sort of a different kind of one that we connected with versus their older albums, because obviously that was the first tour that we went on, on the Roll the Bones tour. so it was just the latest stuff that you'd hear on the radio still at that time. And in particular, this one, I think, had a lot of commercial success. So I would say like early in that freshman year, perhaps it was even the summer going into freshman year, where I started getting exposed to Rush. And then I'd say the Presto album was the one that my brother was particularly into at that time, because they were coming off of that album and he had gone to see them during that tour. And so Roll the Bones kind of had just come out, and I just, everything about it, the cover of it, the artwork, I just remember just, staring at this album cover, just looking at it like this kid, kicking a skull down the sidewalk, just what a cool image for an album cover. And then all the dice in the background. It's just, everything is complete about this. Like the concept of the album all the way through to, like you're saying, that whole theme of chance, which goes through the entire album, which I thought a lot more about as I revisited it, how much of all the songs kind of connect with that idea. And just musically, I was also starting to play bass too. And you were as well, I think, at the time. Like, we were both kind of also really excited, starting out playing a new instrument and then being the bass guitar and seeing Getty and just like trying to, going home after school and trying to learn, all the bass lines and, the solos to all the songs. And I remember playing Where's My Thing and that bass line. Yeah. So just everything was like, it was almost like the Roll of Bones album was like, it was like our gateway to the Rush world for me. It was
Zack, you bring up such a good point. And I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I was thinking about this when I was doing my research. I think freshman year of high school, you already kind of said it. It's one of the most impactful parts of one's life, at least in America, the way it's structured. It's kind of random, but that's why I love that movie, The Perks of Being a Wildflower, so much, even though it's kind of a dark movie if you watch it all the way to the end. It's basically about a boy who goes to high school and he's just trying to fit in. He just really, all he wants are friends. And I can remember that was kind of like what I wanted too. I wasn't necessarily on this path of like, I want to study this or I want to study that. I wanted to just find my group of friends. You and I were at separate high schools freshman year, but I finally got my wits about me and joined you junior year. But I just wanted to find my group of people. I wanted to share my love for music with them day after day and just make going to school tolerable. And I think another impactful time is freshman year of college, followed by freshman year of grown-up life, because they both force major change in oneself and they're like a smash of reality in the face. So, I mean, wouldn't you agree? You learn everything you knew in middle school and then in high school and then in college. You learn that those are all in the past and they're gone, right? So then you must take those experiences and learn from them and move on. So the music that we first heard during these impactful times in our lives certainly created vivid memories that stuck, with us for decades. And I think even up to today. And that's really, I think, why we're talking about Roll the Bones. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And the way we interacted and almost like befriended music and albums then was so completely different than the way we interact with music today. And
Totally.
We had a CD player in our room with the components and all that stuff. If you wanted to play that album, you had to get that CD and put it in there and play it. And so you had a connection with the album in a different way than just, living in our kind of fluid world of streaming music all the time, anytime at your fingertips. There's some nice things about that, but what I would say is like we had more kind of one-on-one experiences with albums where you just felt like you're going to live with that album in your room for the duration of however long that album is. And it's going to take as long as you need to like do your math homework and maybe, you might have to play it again. And so you got really connected to the order of the songs and just like the whole album as a whole.
Dude, you're nailing it. I mean, like you're nailing it. One of the things that I pulled out from my research was a 1991 video that Neil gave on the set of the Roll the Bones video for MTV. And during the video, he said almost like precisely what you're saying, not verbatim, but I'll quote him. He says, quote, "I've always had a sacrilegious view of pop music, that it's eminently disposable, that it's meant to be topical. It's kind of the journalism of the arts. I don't mean this to be falsely humble at all. That's the way I look at all pop music that I like, however much I like it. It's a part of my life now, and that it's meant to be topical. It's meant to reflect on my life. A friend of mine used the phrase recently of the soundtrack of your life. That's what he expects from a good album, that it should come at a good time in his life to reflect his concerns, his passions, and it should occupy that place in his life, and then he moves on and needs a new soundtrack for a new period of his life. That's what it is meant to be, a reflection of now, and then in a year or two, it's in the past." So Z, I thought that was an incredible quote and so relevant to, just how we feel about music. And when I go back and listen to this, I specifically remember like 91 and 92. And even though I was listening to this album, I've been listening to it since then. I don't think of like a party that I was at in 2004 when I was listening to this album. I just always go back to those times. And so, it's such an interesting topic, is like, again, like those periods in your life when like music, especially for Zack and I, was so influential. And I think that that's really what makes this album, I'm going to say it a million times, but that's really what makes this album so special. But yeah, dude, you gave a great point, and I had to jump on that because it was precisely what Neil said. And I think it's kind of like the album is sort of your soundtrack, right? And think of those times back, when you first heard it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the great thing about, doing what you do here with the celebrating albums is, and reflecting on how an album just leaves an imprint in your life. And I hope that never goes away, with how we can connect with just the art and experience of creating an album of music. And that's precisely what it is for the musician. It's a moment in their life when they write a series of songs, and it reflects where they are in their life. Right. So
Yeah.
it makes sense. It should sort of be the same thing from the listener's standpoint, but just the way that, we experience music nowadays, it's harder for that to happen because it's so easy to just flip to the next track or whatever it is. And it's not as much of a stationary experience of just like putting a CD and sitting down and listening to it,
right,
like we used to. So, on the topic of Neil Peart, I feel like just being huge Rush fans, we know all this music, and Rush fans in general like respond immediately to the music of this stuff. But I think it's not until like these types of things where I start talking about the album and the songs that it really becomes just all about Neil Peart and his vision of the world. And it's like when you really rediscover or, remind yourself that this is his mind at work, and these are his words. And we talked about this with the Hemispheres album, and it's, you say like concept album. Well, that's exactly what Rush albums are. Each album is a concept album that, from the incredible depth of Neil Peart's mind, and definitely got me thinking about all that here, like what was going on in his life and why was he so interested in this idea of chance and luck and
it's funny you mention that, because he shared his approach on coming up with the theme for the album. Like what was it about chance? And I think he was saying he liked to start thinking about a theme for every album each time. So he would spend time just kind of mulling before writing any lyrics, just coming up with a theme, right? Mm. And so for Presto, it was magic. And for Roll the Bones, it was chance. But Neil was saying that he liked the idea of a wild card. So that apparently was like the first thing that popped into his head. And he was like, how can I look into this? And this is just, I think, what's such, could you Could you see some of those rock drummers from the 80s who, chug Jack Daniels in front of the camera during an interview? Like, could you see them sitting down and thinking this intellectually? I guess this is just what made, I think, a lot of us just fall in love with Neil more. But Neil was looking at a wild card and then sort of what it represented. And he kept thinking like, turn it up or turn it down, turn it up or turn that wild card down. And those were the very first lyrics that he wrote for the album, which ended up appearing on the song Face Up. And then he followed this theme while writing some of the other songs like Ghost of a Chance, Bravado, The Big Wheel, Neurotica. What was cool is because Neil wrote so fast, Geddy and Alex were forced to speed up their process of writing the music to go along with the lyrics. And Zack, you're familiar with this studio, Lay Studio in Maroon Heights. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Maroon Heights, Ontario. They entered in 1991, February of 91, and they would finish recording by May of that same year. Going back, Neil found that he had the propensity to create drum parts that were almost too rigid. And I think the rigidness of it, the technicality of it is what got a lot of Rush fans, especially Zack and I, into it. But Neil was saying they were a little too organized and too architectural. And so for Roll the Bones, he wanted to improvise a little bit more. And so during a lot of the recording sessions, I guess he would arrive without rehearsing and just add his drums into the song, leaving kind of a less complex rhythm, but still left the song with a strong rock and groove. So one of the interesting things about this album, it was produced by Rush as well as Rupert Hine, who had also produced artists such as Tina Turner, Stevie Nicks, Suzanne Vega, and Thompson Twins. I also found out that he produced the score for one of my favorite 80s movies of all time. Actually, one of my favorite movies of all time ended up coming out in the 80s, Better Off Dead. So, Of course, yeah, and not long ago, like a week ago, I think I had a beer or two, and I was flipping through the channels, and Danny was sitting next to me on his iPad, my son, and I was like, oh, all right, I think the swears are cut out of this. Yeah, I'm just going to watch it. So Danny watched the scene when the mom like puts the slop on John Cusack's plate, and then
Yeah.
it's got raisins in it. Raisins. And then it just crawls off of his plate.
Yes.
And he just watches it. So anyway, so my son got a kick out of that.
That.
Oh my God. Yeah. So that's Rupert Hine. So he's done a lot. And the band was really comfortable with Rupert because he had co-produced their previous album, Presto, and he kind of knew the direction that the band wanted to continue moving in with Roll the Bones. So they had originally planned to release the album in January of 92. So that would have made more sense from like kind of what you were remembering from time frame, Zack. But they said that writing and recording just went so well that they moved the date up to, and it was them as opposed to the record company. They moved the date up to September 91. And so the album came out on September 3rd, 1991. It was released, or I guess nowadays a lot of people say dropped, but it came out in record stores everywhere. So Z, also you were mentioning the album cover earlier. Album cover was designed by the same guy that designed the Hemispheres album cover, Hugh. It's either Hugh Sim or Hugh Syme. The cover, as Zack said, portrays a boy in front of a giant wall of dice. Several hundred different. Is it die? Die.
Is
it die?
Dice. I think
what's dice
plural?
Plural? Is dice
Many.
plural? Die? Like
Die.
many die?
I think dice. Dice is plural. Roll the dice. Dice is the plural. One die is singular die or dice.
Look at that. English lesson every day. So this is a direct representation of the theme that we previously mentioned, chance, and it also plays on many of the terms that are used in gambling, card games, and dice rolling. We've all heard them, right? Like the dice and see what happens. I know, Zack, we've been to casinos together many times, and I've never really been like a big gambler. But one of the many things, the list is very long, but one of the many things I admire about you, especially when we were growing up, was I think you had a lot more of that like willingness to take chances. And I think that they were a lot more calculated, but there were times we were like, screw it, I'm going to Spain.
Oh,
But I
yeah.
mean, I can remember days sitting in dreary, horrendous office, like in a cubicle, and I'd get like an email or a postcard from Zack, and it would be at another cool place. And so, um, I think you really grew up with this mindset, whereas to me, it was sort of something that was over there. It was a ye instead of a key.
There you go. Nice connection.
So, I mean, but back then, dude, did you really dive into the lyrics as much as kind of the way we do it now today?
No, absolutely not. I think, I mean,
I'm laughing because I agree. Like I didn't.
yeah, right. And like looking back on it now, absolutely. Like you look at the words differently now. I think when you're in that world of discovering stuff and just at that stage in our life, I mean, when I was, like post college, those years that you were just talking about there, I think I was more reflective of lyrics and stuff like that. But at this time, when I was just soaking in as much Rush as I could, and I think it was all about the music for me. It was like they could have been talking about anything. Like I didn't know what bravado meant, like okay, maybe I could have looked it up and but
Would have had to get your encyclopedia out though.
yeah, I had to go find the World Book Encyclopedia and my parents
Who wants to do that?
and yeah. I think no, the whole idea and the themes of the words and stuff. I think generally, it has to be the music that captures you first.
Yeah.
And the music is a container, is a vehicle to give you the thoughts and the words. I mean, that's the challenge of writing a good song, right? Like you gotta. It has to appeal to you musically. And then the words are sort of in the background. And I think for you to really think about the words, I mean, sort of talking about with albums where we used to have, big albums and you could sometimes read the lyrics on the inside, but that was like the only way you could really get lyrics. Like
Totally.
You didn't have,
Yeah.
you couldn't just look up lyrics, back then it was like you had to either really listen to them or have them written out in the album. And maybe that was a little bit of a limitation, but I think it was more about just where we were at. I really didn't think a whole lot about a lot of these themes and until now, like looking back on this album and really like thinking about what he was actually saying and how everything is connected. But no, for me, it was much more just the tangible, the music, how it hit me, the artwork, the feel of it, the visuals and the, going to the concert, seeing all the cool, like the skeleton and the bones and like the whole like visual concept of it was just so cool. It's such a cool visual idea to base an album around, and they did so well in all of their albums, and then just brought it into their live shows. I would say no, it was really just entirely about the music for me when I was really just getting into Rush and just trying to play the songs. And I mean, on that note, just musically, this album, when you mentioned that producer, it makes sense because the whole sound of this album has this amazing commercial like sound to it. It makes sense that producer worked with all those artists and had a lot of success in like the 80s and early 90s. And it was just that kind of sound, because you just hear that throughout this album, these amazing transitions and changes and these just blankets of like, there's definitely some synth and things going on in the background, but it doesn't overpower the overall sound of it.
No, it's a rock album. I mean, there are some softer songs. This was, you said it again, man, you hit the nail on the head. Like this was really the album that kind of made us dive deeper. It wasn't the first thing we'd heard, right? You had your brother. For me, you passed that on to me. You made me the ever so famous, and it still sits about 10 feet from me, the Incredibly Rush mixtape. And I think Zack meant to write Incredible Rush, but he wrote Incredibly Rush, which made it way cooler. And I thought for like 10 years that he meant to do that. And then one time he like looked at the tape and was like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
But it was like it was like 7th or 8th grade. And it had songs on it like Closer to the Heart, but you had the Closer to the Heart from A Show of Hands that had the ding, 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 which gave me goosebumps and made me go, who is this? Bastille Day, obviously Tom Sawyer and Spirit of Radio. But this mixtape was really the beginning of my love, and it made me instantly decide I wanted more. I was hooked. And with about a year of experience in that mixtape, like I didn't have any albums, so I just had that tape. And then I think Zack made me another one, and you were trying to woo me or something now. But they came out with Roll the Bones in September of 91, and it was the first new Rush album, kind of like with Division Bell for us, right? Like we were Floyd fans, and we were like, oh my God, this band, oh my God. And then they released Division Bell, and it was like, wait a minute, they've got new music?
Yeah.
And then on top of that, it was good. So,
yeah.
So I think that's the way it was. If the people listening out there, if you guys either went back or go back in the future, listen to our review of Rush's 78 album, Hemispheres, you might remember Zack and I fawning over the band's technical instrumental talent. I'm not going to go too deep into that on this one. You can listen to the Hemispheres podcast because I'm not going to go through like the whole is Neil the greatest of all time. I just feel exhausted by that argument. But if I don't feel you guys have to agree with me, but if Neil is not at least in the conversation, then you need to sit down and just listen to this. Okay, so dude, the album opens with Dreamline.
He's got a roadmap of Jupiter, a radar fix on the stars, all along the highway. She's got a liquid crystal compass, a picture book of the rivers under the Sahara. They travel in the time of the prophets on the desert highway straight to the heart of the sun. Like lovers and heroes, I'm the restless part of everyone. We're only at home.
Which was inspired by thoughts. I'm not going to go through every song, but Zack and I wanted to touch upon some that were kind of special to us. Special.
We got to tell that story. Driving back from this concert,
just
right?
No, that was
wasn't
that
this
was
one.
the Counterparts show in Worcester.
Oh, okay.
The Roll the Bones show was in. I think we saw
That was
them
Worcester too.
twice. No, it was at Great Woods. I got the stub. It was Roll the Bones was Great Woods. Yep. I got
That wasn't the
stuff
one
to
where my
prove it.
dad had to get the wristband.
That was Counterparts.
That was
Counterparts. When he dropped me off at the Centrum, it was a cold February or March, and I waited in line. That show, we were in your mom's caravan, and Plymouth Voyager. And
Oh, yeah.
the sliding door was open, and we were driving, so the light in the car was on. People were looking at us, and I didn't realize like why people were staring at us. And then like you and I looked at each other, we were like, "Oh, the light's on!" Like, people are just like staring at us. And then we got on, Route 9 going the wrong direction. We were like Dumb and Dumber, literally. Like we saw signs for Colorado, and it was like, "Oh, this isn't Wellesley. Wait a second." So when we finally figured it out, we just obviously just did a quick U-turn, but by that point it was pretty late. So
Wow.
yeah. So getting back to the album, the album opens with Dreamline, which was inspired by thoughts and feelings that Neil had frequently during his motorcycle travel. He used to, I'm not sure exactly what tour it started on, but Neil did it all the way through really the final tour, the R40 tour, where he would get on his bike and ride from town to town. And I guess he was doing it on the Presto tour, and he came up with some of the lines, "We're only immortal for unlimited time." And so, Zach, I think this song's really about going for it, like going for your dreams, whether they work or not. We've talked about this a bunch of times already, but as 14-year-olds, I think this spoke directly to us. Again, I know we weren't necessarily as deep in the lyrics, but I certainly remember some of those quick lines that came during changes or right before a change. "We're only immortal for unlimited time when we are young." And, you know, it's just looking back on it now today, when you're 14, you just don't think about like how special it is to just be around and be alive and be healthy. But anyway, as a freshman in high school, I was knee deep in, dreams of becoming a rock star, and Zach actually got to live that out. And so I think those were things I think now even today speak to us as well. So, I don't know. What are your thoughts about Dreamline? I remember they used to open a lot of shows with that song.
Absolutely. Amazing opener to a concert, opener to an album. And like you said, the wandering the face of the earth, wondering what your dreams might be worth, knowing that you're only immortal for a limited time.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. Like, that's just, it got me thinking. You were talking about, do the lyrics hit you at that time of your life? And yeah, I think when you're where we were, like when you're a freshman in high school, especially, in the type of town we grew up in, it's a very insulated kind of existence. I mean, that's the beauty of high school, is that the beauty of being at that time in your life is that you haven't done those things yet. And you looking ahead to those things, and you don't know necessarily, you haven't taken a lot of chances yet in a way, right? Like
Totally.
if this is about chance, that's life in a nutshell, right? It's like you start taking more chances and trying new things out, experience. So at this time, I think I hadn't been exposed to a lot of those things. I hadn't started wandering around the face of the earth.
Right.
That was my post-college or part of college experience too. It was like being really fortunate, being able to get out there and see different parts of the world and stuff, and have that kind of, I would say, academic experience, but also just growing experience as an adult, just being exposed to all that stuff. Lyrically, I think, this song, in a way, I'm respecting, appreciating it, looking back on it even more than when I first heard it. But just musically, Dreamline is just, for me, it's an introduction. It's a beautiful introduction to what you're going to get in this album, which is just these beautiful transitions with just this blanket of sort of synth cushions, with like all the awesome stuff that you love about Rush just sitting right on top of it.
Synth cushion, you couldn't have said it any better. It's not really out in the front like most of their albums in the early, kind of mid 80s, right? But You're absolutely right. It's like a rock band on top of a quiet synth kind of cushion, a cloud. So it just sort of keeps the background full, but it's not right in your face. Like pretty much every Rush album from like 83 to 87, like through Hold Your Fire.
Yeah. And I think you see also in this album, you see more melodic vocal. I'd say more, I don't want to say, I don't want to belittle it or sort of cheapify it, but I'd say there's a little bit more you see kind of efforts on Geddy's part to be a bit more commercial with his with his vocals and vocal melodies. And this song is just very commercially focused in a lot of ways, really catchy vocal and melodic constructions that also have that awesome Rush stuff in the background that makes this band so unique. You still get those driving awesome bass lines and the drums and the awesome solos that just fill the whole soundscape. Just the way that this album is produced, and just these amazing, beautiful changes, on top of these lyrics. It showcases like how awesome Rush can be with the combination of the beautiful softness mixed with this edge to it.
Well, they adapted to the times, right? And somebody made a comment a couple weeks ago. I think I was fire pit or something, and we were listening to music, and they said, what I really liked about X band, I'm blanking on what band we were talking about, but they never changed. They never changed with the times. They stuck to what they loved and knew. And I was like, yeah. And then like later on that night, I thought, well, actually Rush kind of didn't do that. They did the opposite. And they, from the 70s into the 80s, they alienated a lot of fans. And then they got a lot of, because of that change, that synth. And then when they dropped the synth, anyway, I guess I really admire what Rush did. I really, really do. And I think that's why, maybe with the exception of Floyd, that's why they're my favorite band, is because they were like, well, this is what we're listening to now. And they were unapologetic about it, So I think a good example, like Bravado, whenever I listen to Bravado, Zach, I have these weird, I just like threw down on a piece of paper these like random thoughts. But the first thing I could think of was that like, it makes me homesick.
If the moment of glory is over before it's begun, if the dream is won, though everything is lost, we will pay the price, but we will not count the cost. We will pay the price, but we will not count the cost.
And when I say homesick, my home is no longer around. It got torn down and in the fire. No, just kidding. Somebody came in, bought it, the house I grew up in, and we built a McMansion on top of it. But when I listen to Bravado, it brings back memories of listening to this album over and over and over again in your room, man. And as simple as we can agree the song is instrumentally, I think it speaks louder than many of the other tracks on the album. The band was excited about the song's arrangement, and I guess they decided on this one that they didn't want to overwork it, as they had with other songs. Like, I'm thinking about you, La Villa Straggiato. Eventually, they just decided to keep it simple, which resulted in kind of a deeper track. But if you listen carefully to the lyrics, Zach, in Bravado, I didn't realize that it's pondering the eventual rejection of suicidal thoughts. And I didn't really pick up on that. And so again, it was what was so much fun about researching more of this album was just watching hours and hours of interviews that I had to really go hunting for. You know, the lyric quote, "Though everything is lost, we will pay the price, but we will count the cost." The message I kind of got from that was, if you fail, try again, keep going, don't ever give up. And I thought this had a deep meaning. It followed similar themes from earlier songs like The Pass on Presto, which I think Getty mentioned was, at one point, and we were at a show and Getty mentioned that was his favorite Rush song. So
Yeah, I mean, you know, just talking about all those things and then coming back to, you know, the inspiration and the lyrics, I thought to myself, and I had to kind of look it up, what was going on in Neil's life when he was writing this stuff, and what was he questioning fate and the progression of events in your life and things like that. And I'm just reading now that it wasn't until a few years after this album came out that he lost his daughter and then his wife, within a year or so of each other.
Within a year, his common law wife Jackie and his daughter within a year of each other.
Yeah,
and that's when the band, you know, if you're a fan of the band, it's pretty much like, you know, on everyone's radar. The band basically paused and didn't know if they were ever going to come back. Getty and Alex said in a ton of interviews, like, I thought it might be over, but we didn't want to push Neil. They wanted him to come back when he wanted to. And I think, what was it, man? Was it like a 5-year hiatus? Something like that?
It was,
like
yeah.
The late 90s, I think.
Yeah. His daughter died in 97. His wife died in 98. Daughter's was a freak accident. His wife died of cancer.
Right.
I believe that they took a break, and maybe their next album was Vapor Trails, if I'm not mistaken. And
You're right. And they opened that tour in Hartford, Connecticut, which I missed that show. And there's a great interview with Neil where he said, like, he was nervous as hell that night. And after the show was over, he was like, I got this. And he went to bed that night, like, incredibly excited that he made the decision to join the band again. And he was like, this is the reason why I'm on this planet, is to do this. You know, it gives me goosebumps just thinking about it today. Yeah.
And think about as much what passed and how the world changed from Roll the Bones, or not Roll the Bones, Counterparts. It would have been. Well, wait, what was the last album before? Was it Counterparts?
You know, I'm embarrassed to admit, like, it's Test for Echo. Okay, yeah. The 90s get a little foggy for me for a couple of reasons, but mainly because, I think like I think I remember you and I like listening to Test for Echo and being like,
it wasn't.
And then
Counterparts
we
was
started,
huge. Remember Counterparts came in.
Yes.
I remember that distinctly, listening for the first songs released on, was it WBCN at the
BCN
time?
and
Boston.
AAF, both stations. We had two great rock stations in Boston.
Yep. And I remember recording it off the radio when they released those songs. And I'd be like, I'm going to listen to the radio, I'm going to get my cassette ready and just record it. And the first record, like, yes, play yeah. And it was like, this is the first Counterpart song. And because at that time we were just so hungry for like Counterparts was that space between Roll the Bones and Counterparts was like, like that's when I and we just got completely obsessed with Rush. So by the time it was like Counterparts, another album's coming out, that was truly like our album, because that was like the one that came out like
we were already like we had buried our flag in the ground saying like we're Rush fans, and it was like official. So that was that time we were talking about when I waited outside in like 4-degree weather to get tickets. And that was a great story because I ended up getting really crappy tickets and you were like, this is unacceptable. And so like after a few phone calls, you call me and you're like, it's all set. Like we're going to give back the other ones. And I think we were in the 20th row. So we were on and I was like, I'm just going to follow Zach's lead from now on. And that was the night too when they played a ton of songs, but I remember that was the first time I heard Analog Kid. And,
Oh,
and it was like, wow, like when the lasers came and they shot right over our heads. And
yes.
that was, yeah. So that's one of my most fond memories of that. But getting back to, emotional attachments. I mean, I have an emotional attachment to every Rush album now. And the last couple years, especially after Neil died in January of 2020, I went back and listened to Test for Echo. I went back and listened to Vapor Trails. And I remember like texting you and being like, Zach, where were we? Now it's not like front to back the greatest albums in my opinion, but there's some really good tracks on those albums. But anyway, back to Roll the Bones. Zach, I'm sure you can kind of relate to this. Like my emotional attachment to Roll the Bones, I think it goes farther than just music. We've hit on this topic a few times already during this pod. Like, it's no secret I'm attached to the past. I spend many years trying to figure out why, because quite honestly, I've got a lot more today than I did 32 years ago. But after kind of looking inside and doing a lot of reflection, self-reflection, I suppose, and I was thinking about this, man, what I miss most of all is that feeling of excitement when you're a kid, wondering what are things going to be like when you grow up? As a kid, we didn't think about, I'm going to get heavy for a minute, but like we didn't think about school shootings. At least I didn't. I didn't think about politics. I didn't think about injuries. You and I were just talking about, you point to like, oh, there's the pizza store and your freaking arm goes out of whack. I mean, like that's part of life now as at our ages. But I didn't think about those things. And I just thought about the future and I just thought about music. And I think that's really a huge reason why this album, why I have such an attachment, because I don't think it is. I wouldn't raise my hand and say this is the greatest Rush album, but it's certainly something that all fans need to listen to. I think it's probably the most special for me because of that, because it was really like our introduction, our step into, being fans and being like, oh, can we join the club too, guys? Because Rush fans were like very, let's face it was all dude mainly until later on. Then they had some women, but Rush fans were very, and we became them. We became like, super picky. And if you would meet a Rush fan at a party and they were like, oh yeah, my favorite Rush song is Spirit of Radio, you were like, all right, next. Not because it's not a good song, but it was just kind of overplayed on the radio. I think we can all agree to that. So
yeah, it's like saying wish you were here.
Wish you were here. Yeah. Or how I wish you were here.
Yeah. Yeah. What's your favorite? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty much everything we're talking about with high school and just where you are in your life and the simplicity of not having a lot of responsibilities. And I think the way we experience everything nowadays, with, mobile technology and phones and everything like that, it's a different reality now. And, kind of comes back to just how we interact and experience music and stuff. But yeah, this was one of the albums that was just the soundtrack of our high school careers, and just connect so many things with vivid memories and associations. And it's a nice contrast with the last podcast, the Rush one we did, because I think this one has songs that connected, immediately with our life, as opposed to when we heard those older Rush songs and we're like discovering something that was, released many, many years ago.
I felt like it was somebody else's music and they were letting us in on like a cool secret. Right. Mm-hmm. But like Roll the Bones was ours. Like we were there. Counterparts was ours. We were there when maybe not so much Roll the Bones, but pretty close. But like Counterparts, we were there, the day it opened, the day it was released, the day it dropped.
Yeah.
We went out to the store and we bought it. And then we went into our cars and we sat in the parking lot and listened to it. Like that was regular.
Put it in that CD player. Put it in that mobile CD player that we had connected to
it's a
crappy adapter that you'd stick in your car, and then hope
the Discman.
The Discman wouldn't skip too much on your way, home. And pulled out the inlay and started looking through all the lyrics and all the who are they going to thank on this album? Like,
right.
and, all those details of just discovering it, reading the lyrics as you're listening to it for the first time, if you wanted to go to a concert, you had to go wait in line at a Newbury Comics or a Strawberries, where the Ticketmaster outlets. Those were the days when, find that outlet to go get tickets.
Yep.
And just so much more involved. So it just brings back all of those things. And then just, on a musical level, I think, when this album came out too, and kind of going to what happened with us musically, and just as a big picture kind of thing in the context of what was going on in the 90s with music, this kind of hit before grunge took over.
It was right around the time, right? I mean, I remember it was early freshman year. So fall of freshman year, when somebody said to me, like, you, more than anyone I know, it was Kyle Hegarty, who's been on the podcast before, and Kyle. He said, you need to hear this band, Nirvana. And I was like, what is it? And he was like, and I couldn't get the Smells Like Teen Spirit. I asked him 100 times. But you're right, man. Rush came out during that time frame, and it was different music. It wasn't the grunge, but it did kind of come out before. The grunge was slowly starting to bleed out a little bit, but it wasn't until, I think, really like early to mid 92 when it really was like
Jam. 10. Yeah.
Lollapalooza 92, I feel like was that's when Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, like not long after that, Alice in Chains came out with Dirt. Soundgarden had Bad Motorfinger. Pearl Jam had, it was, so Rush, you're right, man. Rush was a little bit before that. And it was interesting. That was like, I dove deep into grunge. I think you did a little bit as well, but you held on to a lot of the other classics, whereas like I kind of tuned out of everything. I dropped all of my hair metal stuff. Like I stopped listening to Poison. I stopped listening to Cinderella and White Lion, Warrant and Trickster and Firehouse. Even though I chased Janie Lane's limo away.
Finally found the love of a lifetime.
I remember we went to that softball game in the Boston Commons, and you were kind of like along for the ride, but I was just like, no, dude, like the dude Warrant, oh my God, Warrant. And you were like playing along, and I'll never forget. Yeah. I remember that was the first time I kind of wanted to analyze like my love for hair metal bands. Cause you were like, all right, this is cool. But I dropped that phase, moved on to grunge, but Rush was like one of the mainstays. And then I think maybe 93, 94, maybe 94, 95 is when like the jam bands really from my life really started to just hit me to where I couldn't stop listening to that. But we were talking earlier about lyrics on this album, and I wanted to mention something because I think despite lyrics, my favorite track on this album is hands down Where's My that's the first instrumental that Rush would record since YYZ, which was on 1981's Moving Pictures, which I think a lot of people Z would regard as the band's greatest album. It's not necessarily my favorite, but I think it's probably like front to back. It's probably their best. But I laugh when I think of instrumentals because I love them. I know you do too. I love how a lot of times they scare a lot of pop fans away. I think it's maybe an attention span thing. I don't know. But I just never thought a song had to have lyrics to have meaning. So whenever Zack and I listen to Where's My Thing, I'm always like air drumming every single time. Dude, I've done this too before. Not long ago, actually, I have like anyone who I hear who is like, I can't get into them. I'm not really into that band. I'm like, oh, I make like a mental note because I don't want to come off as a douche. But I've had instances where I've been in my car and I'll throw in Where's My Thing, and all I'm doing is like I'm pretending to pay attention to the room. I'm really just like out of my right corner of my right eye, I'm like looking over at them, waiting for their head to bob. And almost each time, each person has gone, yo, this is pretty cool, man. What is this? And I'm like, ha! And then, of course, the conversation follows like, why do you care so much? But I'm like, I think, I think it's Geddy's voice that turns a lot of people off. And I think a song like Where's My Thing, I think anyone who's especially like a musician can get into it. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the way that the order of the songs, you've got a lot of these really beautifully constructed songs with, just looking at the track listing, the Dreamline, Bravado, Roll the Bones. Those three, have just so beautifully constructed melodies and transitions and really bold, like expansive lyrics and ideas and things that are thrown at you. Face Up kind of like is a little bit a different pacing and like almost more of like a rock blues structure in a way.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden they hit you with this instrumental out of nowhere. The sound, definitely you got to talk about the sound of their instruments and their basses. Geddy used this wall bass on this album that had a really distinct kind of sound to it. I think maybe this was one of the first albums where Alex started using the PRS guitar. And so you had like this different kind of sound and then the production of it as well. But Where's My Thing was just this awesome combination of really awesome staccato kind of bass and thumbs and, finger kind of combination. And then these awesome driving guitar and synth led changes,
Boom. Yeah. It's kind of like just boom. There was something about the synth in this album that you hit the nail on the head earlier. You said that it was, just a cushion of synth, right? But this song, it's kind of out in the open, but only during those parts. I consider it like a rock song. I think it was the PRS. Like Alex's guitar is just a lot heavier. And of course you've got Neil's. And then you had the cool boom. Anyway. I think that came out of just a jam session, and hearkening back to Neil's info that he gave about his approach to this album. He wanted to be less technical. Of course, I think of that song as pretty technical. Like whenever I want to show someone, like show off Neil, it's kind of like showing off your big brother or whatever. A lot of times I'll play, like I said, I put on Where's My Thing because I think a lot of people are like, I just don't like Rush. I'm like, you don't like them because you don't like that loud screeching voice, and you probably heard, Tom Sawyer, what do you say? And you hear Geddy get all the way up there. For some people, it's just not for them. But I'm like, you can't blanket it. So
yeah, and I think there's got to be a list of the all-time best Neil Peart fills And this has got to be in the
Yeah.
top 5 or something,
Yeah.
right? That
Totally.
long fill that he does in the middle of the song, which is
Yeah.
just everyone's
Yeah.
waiting for that when they play it live. It's
Yeah.
a great live song. It's 3 to 4 minutes, just perfect little transitional song to go from one tune to the next, and just it's got that
Very
call and-
melodic.
very melodic.
Yeah.
Got the call of back and forth of it's
It's repetitive in a good way. Like it's got a theme to it in a sense. Like theme's not the right word, but it has parts that repeat, so it feels like a real song, even though there's no lyrics. It's not this 30-minute La Villa Strangiato. It's like you said, it's 3 or 4 minutes, and it does the trick, and then it moves on to the next. So I think it keeps the attention of people who may be, because I mean, any like diehard Rush fans can listen to it and be like, oh, I want this to be longer. But I think you're right. Like, I think Rupert Hine and the band this time, like Presto, they were going for maybe a little bit of more of that commercial success, or not so much commercial success, but they wanted to simplify things a little bit more.
Yeah. And even that song was, as I'm seeing now, was nominated for a Grammy in terms of instrumental song. As I'm seeing now, losing to Eric Johnson's Cliffs of
Dover. Yep. Who interestingly enough, Zach, he opened for Rush during the first leg of the Roll the Bones tour.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. And also the Dreamline reached number 1 in the US. Where's My Thing was actually Rush's second song to be nominated for a Grammy.
Wow.
And the album itself hit number 10 in the UK, number 11 in Canada, and number 3 in the US on the Billboard Top 200. And so Roll the Bones was the most commercially successful album since Moving Pictures.
Wow. That's so cool. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. You get sort of stuck talking about like the sort of the Rush fanatics and the whole kind of obsession of Rush. But, this album reminds you that this band was also one of the most commercially successful bands of all time. And you have these albums, they produced tons of hit singles and album, songs that people heard all over the place, whether they were huge Rush fans or not. So they had that capability to put that stuff together, and then the depth of so much other stuff that musicians like us just latched onto and related to. And I just think it shows how amazingly balanced they were as a band to have that amazing musicianship and stuff that, the bass players and the guitarists and of course the drummers just obsessed over, but also had this amazing way of tying together melodies and transitions. I always go back to that word transitions because it's just like, that's really like, it hits you when you're listening to these songs. That's really what it is. It's like these hard transitions that just hit you out of nowhere. And they design so many of their songs around those just to almost like maximize the effect, and I think a lot of their song construction comes down to those things, like the journey that all the songs take you on. They're so multidimensional. Yeah,
I think it's important to talk about the song Roll the Bones too, because I can remember that song taking a bit of a hit from the sort of non-Rush fans, and when it got popular, because Roll the Bones, the song, has that rap section in the middle.
You can stake that claim. Good work is the key to good fortune. Winners take that praise, losers seldom take that blame. If they don't take that game, and sometimes a winner takes nothing. We draw our own designs, fortune has to make that brain. We go out in the world and take our chances.
dude, one of the other things that this research did was it actually showed me that the rap part was just Geddy with an effect on his voice. I didn't know that. I could have sworn somebody told me, and I thought it was you, but it could have been somebody else, that it was the rapper KRS-One from Boogie Down Productions. But then
Really? Wow.
sat there for like a couple minutes, and I was like, maybe I just dreamt that. You know how sometimes, I don't know if you're guilty of this, but like sometimes I just like, I'll dream something up in my head, or maybe I overheard someone saying something and then I create my own, but I could have sworn that's who it was. So, and interestingly, so
I thought it was Neil for a while too. I thought it was Neil.
Yeah, it was Geddy. He put an effect on his voice, and he was talking about his voice too on the album, and he said he intentionally kept his voice in a more natural, lower tone that really added to the melodic character of the band. And he said, there's so much scope and so much music available when you keep your voice at a lower tone when he sings. So I just thought that was interesting because, yeah, there really aren't a ton of songs on this album, Roll the Bones, where he gets up as high as, Bastille Day or Anthem. I mean,
Yeah.
Anthem is like, forget it, right?
Yeah, that's really interesting you say that, because that does come across really clearly in this album, that he is working in that lower register and thinking more about kind of it's a different way that he shapes melodies. He's not trying to force his voice and get it to that upper register. He's really kind of living in that world of just comfort, almost like his speaking voice.
Get busy with the facts. No zodiacs or almanacs, no maniacs and polyester slashes the facts. Gonna kick some Julius Max. It's a parallax, you dig? You move around, the small gets big, it's a rig. It's action, reaction, random interaction. So who's afraid of a little abstraction? Can't get no satisfaction from the facts. You better run, homeboy. Facts are fact from known to known.
In a lot of these songs, and Bones is an example of that too. When they get to the chorus, why does it happen? Because it happens. He's not trying to push it, Yeah, I think that definitely comes across, and they wrote a lot of the songs like around that. Bravado is a great example of that too.
Same thing, yeah.
It all
very
just
easy. Like you and I could stand up and play that tomorrow. I mean, we could learn it and it'll be super easy. So.
Yeah.
Why do you think with Roll the Bones, why do you think did you ever find out why they wanted to put like a rap section in there? I mean, it was really Neil's idea, but I remember we talked about this, but I never really feel like I found the right answer.
Yeah. I mean, they were experimenting, I think, with different things at the time, as they always do in all their albums. I'm sure also the popularity of hip hop. You mentioned KRS-One, and this was also early 90s,
Right. There was a lot of good hip hop back then.
With Yo MTV Raps and Tribe Called Quest and De La Soul and
Oh my God.
Boogie Down Productions and KRS-One and the Jungle Brothers and the early 90s hip hop thing. I'm sure those were potential influences and also just like, I think it just fit with the song. They were just looking for more of this kind of edgy, kind of staccato, kind of breakdown section. I also saw in this album a lot of different kinds of effects, even effects on the drums at times. In, I think, Where's My Thing, Neil uses almost like a phasing effect on the drums, and you hear that connected to the drum sound, which could have been like MIDI and other things he was experimenting with at the time. And I think you see the same thing with Geddy and Alex's sound that comes across in Roll the Bones. Geddy was sort of slapping it a lot and using his thumb and getting these harder, edgy kind of sounds.
Yeah.
And that's what you hear in the background underneath this rap. You hear.
Yep. He uses the boom. Yeah. He uses the wall bass, which I think is, if I remember, that's the first time he used that. I believe he used his Fender. And he was using that famous Steinberger throughout the 80s.
Yeah.
It's interesting. This is the first time since the late 70s that Neil went back to acoustic drums, because he had used electric drums all throughout the 80s. I'm
Oh,
not
that's
quite sure if he did on Moving Pictures. I think it would be all acoustic drums on that, but he used electric drums all through the 80s, and this was the first album when he went back to acoustic drums. So, that obviously plays a lot into their sound. Another one of probably my second favorite, I don't know, I think it's Where's My Thing and then maybe Bravado, but a special song to me has always been The Big Wheel, and not just on this album, but just in general as a Rush song. I think a lot of people wouldn't ever even put The Big Wheel on their top 20, but for me, it's up there. It's not an incredibly technical song, but I looked into this, and it's a song that Neil wrote keeping in mind the trade-off between innocence and experience. And he said it wasn't autobiographical. A lot of the songs he wrote weren't autobiographical, but he wanted to find universal things that people could relate to. And as I mentioned earlier, he enjoyed riding his motorcycle from city to city during tours. And he'd stop at like the smallest diner in the middle of nowhere, and he'd have breakfast and just listen to people around him talk. And he said that he was influenced by just hearing people just embarking on their regular day. And this is what he said kept life on the road for him leveled. And The Big Wheel really had a lot to do with that. So, another song. Actually, before I go on to the next one, what are some of your thoughts about it?
I'd say something that, The Big Wheel, it's funny, really was not anticipating this, but in diving back into this album, I feel like I knew a lot of the other more kind of A-side songs really well. And it's the cool thing when you go back into an album, then you kind of rediscover or discover other songs that you didn't really listen to as much. And The Big Wheel was one of those. And interestingly enough, the one that I've sort of found myself re-singing over and over again as I've been listening to this album. And I think it has a lot to do with what I was talking about before, which is like very commercialized lyrical melodies, that you don't often hear in Rush songs. You could almost take this song and have like a country singer or someone redo it. I've been thinking about that because of the playing for time, don't wanna wait for heaven, looking for love, for an angel to forgive my sins. You know what I mean? Like that's like a really nice little kind of
the lyrics are beautiful,
bluegrassy kind of song that you could play. You could imagine somebody playing it, and I think that kind of the way that Geddy sings in the chorus in this song is something you don't often see in Rush songs, in the way that it has that kind of commercial and really straight ahead kind of structure to it.
Playing for time,
Well, I was only a kid, didn't know enough to be afraid, playing the game, but not the way the big boys played. Nothing to lose, maybe I had something to trade, the way the big wheel spins. It's exactly what we were talking about earlier with being 14 and you're just a kid and you're not thinking about, some of those heavier things that I was mentioning, right? So I don't know, this song really resonated with me, and I have to say that this one sticks out. Whenever I pull up Roll the Bones, the album, this is always the first one that I go to.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
it just has that I don't know. I feel like this is my song. Like every time I meet a Rush fan and they're like, oh, we talk about the usuals, right? Sometimes it's cool to meet someone who's just like, yeah, I really like, name a real random track, maybe Jacob's Ladder or something like that. But this to me is just a melodic harmony that makes me think of, again, it makes me nostalgic for those times. So
Yeah. And I think that's really speaks to like, I mean, the whole album, and especially these things, when you have the big wheel, Ghost of a Chance, Bravado, you have these really almost somber,
yeah,
beautifully constructed melodies and really just beautiful songs that are really accessible, that are not always, you
it's a
don't
great
always
term.
Rush
Yeah.
song.
Yeah, it's not there aren't any 30-minute instrumentals or even 30-minute sort of prog rock. You mentioned Ghost of a Chance, Zach, and just kind of the way it was a little bit more commercial or softer, or however you want to put it. It was interesting. Neil, when he was talking about Ghost of a Chance, same interview, he was saying that it's not really a love song or a ballad, even though it kind of is considered one by some of the fans, but it fit in with Neil's overall theme of randomness.
Like a million little doorways, all the choices we made, all the stages we passed through, all the roads we played. For so many different directions, our separate paths might have turned. With every door that we opened, every bridge that we burned. Somehow we find each other through all that masquerade. Somehow we found each other. Somehow we have stayed in a state of grace. I don't believe in destiny or the guiding hand of fate. I don't believe in forever, or love as a mystical state. I don't believe in the stars or the planets or angels watching from above. But I believe there's a ghost of a chance we can find someone to love and make it last. And make it last.
And he said something that was really cool, like all the things that we go through in life and the people that we meet, it's mostly by chance. The places that we go, the people that we meet there, all those people or all those things are so random, and yet through all that, people do end up meeting each other. So there's a ghost of a chance that something special could happen when two people meet. The odds are usually against it, but at the same time, the ghost of a chance sometimes does come through and people will find each other and stay together. I know I have a unique situation in how I met my wife. I kind of consider that a sort of a ghost of a chance. But I think this theme, again, it was an acceptable theme for Neil to write in terms of a love song, but it was funny. He wouldn't ever call it a love song. And then I started thinking to myself, are there any Rush songs that are sort of like Poison or Motley Crue, you know, like Every Rose Has Its Thorn or Home Sweet Home? And then I was like, no, they don't exist. Like, there really aren't. There are certainly songs about women, but I don't think you'll hear the word baby in many of their
Yeah, well, you couldn't go
songs.
back to the early, you know, the
First album?
first album,
Yeah,
maybe.
That's a
where
good
they
point.
Wanted to sound
Talking
like,
about fast cars and chicks with, you know,
yeah,
tight jeans. Yeah.
right. There was, of course, I think, but that was pre-Peart and like,
Rutsey
and
was
he was-
writing. Neil and I'm sorry. John Rutsey was doing a lot of the writing, and so was Geddy and
Yeah.
Alex a little bit too. And they wanted to, as we know, Rutsey wanted to kind of go more in the direction of Bad Company. And
yeah,
Geddy said in like thousands of interviews, like they wanted to go more in the direction of Yes, Pink Floyd, King Crimson, and so that was mainly why Rutsey quit.
yeah. Well, boy, did they ever
I know,
pick
right?
the right replacement.
Yep.
And to just Peart just immediately define them and open them up to, you know, all these amazing concepts and wordings. You really see, you know, I'm just looking at the lyrics for Ghost of a Chance, you know, and he's pretty explicit, you know. It's like
Yeah.
I don't believe in destiny or the guiding hand of fate. I don't believe in forever or love as a mystical state. I don't believe in the stars or the planets or angels watching from above. I believe there's a ghost of a chance we can find someone to love and make it last. He's just, I mean, basically
Simple.
he's out there, right? Like saying,
Simple, but it's like, I think it resonates a lot, and it again sticks with the theme, which is so amazing. Like, dude, you could argue that once again, this is a concept album in a sense. I mean, they don't repeat, you know, unlike I remember the first time I heard The Wall, and I remember hearing like the near going through different songs, and I was like, oh my God, like this is what a concept album is. And Russ certainly has that as well in other albums. But I mean, in a way, this is kind of a concept album because it follows the same theme from song to song to song and doesn't break from that, right?
yeah, absolutely. All the songs in this album really just, they connect with this idea of like the chance versus fate, and are things predetermined or are things just the luck of the draw?
Right.
And you see him battling through those things, which is why it made me think about his own life at the time. Like, was he questioning those things in his own life? You know, were things happening to him where he was just like, you know what? I don't think there is any kind of overpowering force out there that's causing these things to happen. Maybe it's just luck. Maybe it's just weird people that you meet in your life, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I think this whole album deals with that balance of what is it? What are the forces that move our life along?
Did you ever see the movie Sliding Doors with Gwyneth Paltrow? Came out in like the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yes. Jude Law. Yes.
Yeah, and it was literally like, what would happen if she makes a train and meets the love of her life? Or I think in this, I'm going back now, it's probably been 20 years since I've seen the movie, but I think one of them, she either makes the train and meets this guy who she ends up marrying, and then the guy ends up being like a jerk. And then, you know, while that movie's playing, the same movie you're watching is also clipping to what happened to her life when she didn't make that train. And so I remember sitting in my apartment in Brookline watching that and being like, whoa, that's pretty heavy stuff. Like thinking about life and just how little things, you take one step out and you meet one person, you know, you decide to go out one night. You didn't want to go out, but you decide to go out, or vice versa. You don't feel well and you decide not to go out, and you find out something terrible happened that night and you missed it, you know? So,
yeah,
you know,
Yeah.
Go ahead. What were you going to say? Sorry.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah. I mean, and it's almost like an empowering concept that like it's in your hands, you know, like sometimes it doesn't always work out. And it's not because it's been predetermined, but because it's kind of up to you, you know, to make it last and to make things work. And and sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't, So for sure, it's a applying that idea of chance to life and to experiences that we're going to go on. What it does is it basically says you're the one that makes things happen, and you don't have to blame it on anything or anyone. I think that's part of what Neil might be saying here.
Something cool about the music of Roll the Bones. We've been talking about the lyrics for so long. Going back to the music, I thought this was interesting, Zach. Neil said when he was writing Roll the Bones, he went back and listened to Power Windows, which I remember when I heard this, I was watching an interview and I was like, okay, he's got my attention. Power Windows came out in 85, and it was the first album that they produced with Peter Collins. And Peter Collins' approach was to put tons of different sounds, instruments, synth on the album. And I think Neil made a really interesting comment when he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, he said, I still really enjoy Power Windows, but when I listened to it the other day, it had been several years and I was distracted by how many sounds were coming at me at once. And he kind of winced. And he said, honestly, I found it dizzying. And he goes, I've got no regrets, but I'm glad that phase of our career is sort of over. And he went on to say that the band's approach to Roll the Bones, maybe minus Geddy, who is really famous for, even to this day, he'll admit he was a little sad to say goodbye to all the synth, but Geddy admits that it was the right decision. But, the band's approach was really to break it all down, take out a lot of that sound, and just make it a rock record with kind of less going on. But like you mentioned, there's still that synth cushion in the background, but it's not, in your face.
Yeah, I would say one way to perhaps sum up what you're saying is that I would say that in a lot of their previous albums, the lyrics served the instrumentation and really were just other elements to mix into the whole orchestration and songs, the Rush songs as a whole. Right. I would say what you see in this album is you see, in a way, kind of the flip side of that, where the synth serves the lyrics, and the vocals and the lyrics take center stage. Of course, you see that in other songs where, I feel like a lot of their choruses are designed that way, where there's a major shift, a major transition, and then there's a very heavy, beautiful, vocally led melody that Geddy shows, and then all the instrumentation kind of supports that. And then when we go back into the verses and all that stuff, everything comes back in. But I think you see that in other songs, like was it Marathon, or some of their earlier songs where these really beautiful vocal led choruses. So I think, yeah, for sure, I think that the production of this one for sure lends itself really well to all that.
And it goes back to, what we were talking about. They've always been transparent that they've listened carefully to the music of present day each time they write a new record. And they were, also really upfront that they responded to present day music. You can really hear it in virtually every Rush album, right? Like, think of Fly By Night and Hemispheres, and think of Moving Pictures to Hold Your Fire. Like, the difference is there. Think of Counterparts, and then think of Clockwork Angels, right? The band always kept their lyrics and technicality at a peak level. But when you listen to each album, it's obvious that they were incorporating present day music. And I think, you've said it a bunch of times already, how it was just before the grunge kind of came out. The grunge genre had really hit big, and they were still working off of sort of grooving, following that magic carpet ride from the 80s into the 90s. And then I guess Counterparts, they started to get a little bit heavier, and then Test for Echo, they got a little bit heavier. Vapor Trails, there's some almost like borderline metal song, practically, like it's really heavy stuff. So we've been talking about some of our favorite songs. I have to say, one of my least favorite songs, Neurotica, it's I was thinking about this. It's probably one of my least favorite Rush songs, but every time I throw on the album, I listen to it.
You just don't get it, what it is, well, you're not really sure. You move like you're walking on thin ice, talking like you're still insecure. Time is a spiral, space is a curve. I know you get dizzy, but try not to lose your nerve. Life is a diamond, you turn into dust, waiting for rescue, and I know that you just don't get it. You just don't get it. Neurotica, Exotica. Oh, it's just erotica.
The lyrics are very interesting, but the chorus is, I think, a little repetitive. It's a little soft for me, softer than, say, even like Bravado. But every time I listen to it, man, I still smile. It reminds me of driving around in our hometown. And so the point I'm trying to make is it's still, in a weird way, it's still special to me. And I think it, going back to the comment I made earlier about how it's the emotional attachment to the time, as opposed to just listening to, it's neurotica. It kind of seems like Geddy. I just remember thinking like Geddy or Neil, basically, Geddy and Neil were like, just let's find every word out there that rhymes with neurotica and just say that for 10 minutes in this song, or 4 minutes, however long the song is. I also think Heresy brings back the same feeling to me that Neurotica does. And although I enjoy this track more than Neurotica, I think Heresy is a beautiful song, and I forgot how much I loved it.
From Moscow to Berlin, people storm the barricades, walls go tumbling in. The counter-revolution, people smiling through their tears. Who can give them back their lives and all those wasted years? Those wasted years, all those precious wasted years. Who will pay? All around that dull gray world of ideology.
I'm not sure if they ever played it live. Do you ever remember seeing it?
I don't remember seeing Heresy played live. It's a really interesting song, and another one of these just really melodically driven songs that have this kind of, like I said, sort of almost somber kind of feel to them.
Yeah.
An interesting instrumentation to it as well. And it almost has a kind of a connection to, when they start talking about like Russia and Eastern Europe, like communism, it almost felt a bit like some of the older Pink Floyd songs, including, maybe even one from a little album called The Final Cut, perhaps.
That's perfect lyrics right there. All around that dull gray world, from Moscow to Berlin, people storm the barricades, walls go tumbling in. Boom, there it is right there. The point you just made, right? So,
yeah.
Interesting lyrics. I think that this is, despite the fact they weren't singing about wizards and witches and all these like third worlds that only exist in their head, Cygnus X1, and you hear these like spaceship sounds, and everybody knows where they were the first time they heard 2112, the song, in Temple of Syrinx and everything like that. But this is just, I don't know, there's something about Heresy that I just, again, I get the same feeling that I did, just that kind of nostalgic feeling for the time. But when you dig deep or just, you don't even have to dig deep, when you just look at the lyrics, it really has a cool message.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just again, like coming back to the genius of Neil Peart's lyrics and the journey that he takes you through Rush's career of albums. And I mean, to have a drummer who's so incredibly skilled like he is, but also give you in the early part of, like, you're talking about these early Rush albums with this world of like medieval,
Right.
references and going through the forests and all this,
Right.
And then now years later, talking about politics of Eastern Europe, but also these bigger ideas of life and chance and fate and where life is taking us. And I mean, it's the messages of these amazing Rush songs and just the things that really last. Here we are years later, looking back and dissecting these songs and talking about all these things in different ways that we never did before, even though we've been listening to these songs for decades.
Well, I have to give you credit, because this was your idea, and when you first said it to me, I think I was standing on the steps of your parents' house. It's like, like in my head, I was like, I don't know if I would pick that one. It's not my necessarily, but then it hit me, and I think you even said it. It was like, that was really like our first album that we kind of became real fans, I think. And before moving on, I guess, I didn't know if there were any other songs you wanted to point out. I want to wrap up at some point soon.
Yep.
And I wanted to just quickly, or at a certain point soon, go into some of the live shows that we saw, because I think that this podcast wouldn't be complete without talking about some of those. But were there any other songs on this album you wanted to call out that we haven't already called out?
You mentioned quickly Neurotica, and I think that probably the last one too, You Bet Your Life, also has a very similar driving chorus. I think there's also a lot of vocal layers that happen in this album. You see Geddy experimenting a lot with double, triple tracking his voice and harmonizing with himself and creating a lot of kind of interesting timing with the vocal layers and things. And I think you get that a little bit in You Bet Your Life as well. You get some multiple layers things where there's like a talking in the background, and then it kind of connects in with, everything we've been talking about chance and how it applies to life and the steps that you take and the the repercussions of your choices and things like that. But no, I think we covered it pretty well. I think for me personally, Bravado is a song that really struck me in a similar way to, I guess, what you were saying about The Big Wheel. For me, just the sound of Bravado just really takes me right back to seeing this tour on these Rush concerts, because it just has this beautiful tone and consistency to this whole song, and I can just see the lasers rising up from the stage, and it has this really beautiful, just driving, really simple bass line in the background, and then Alex's staccato kind of
echoey. I just feel like I'm hearing it in an arena, and the echoing sound of his guitar. And
yeah. It also like escalates and it's a beautifully constructed song that just, starts really mellow, but then just like builds and builds and builds. We will pay the price.
Right.
And it just keeps going and going. And so, I think for me, that really encapsulates this album is just this really, beautiful commercial kind of packaging of the songs that they thought about. But underneath that surface, that beautiful melodic surface is still all the things you love about Rush. We haven't even really talked too much about Alex Lifeson, his solos, our sound in this album too, but like his solos were just amazing in this album too. And the sound of his guitar. And I think it was really kind of a breakthrough album in that way for him as well.
It's funny, Alex doesn't always get the credit that Neil and Geddy get because many would argue that they're best at their craft, but I think Alex in many ways is underrated, but some Rush fans would say he's not underrated. He's perfectly rated. He is incredible. And you're right. This album, more so than past Rush records, made me really listen to Alex's playing over some of Geddy's. I mean, my ear kind of naturally, like yours, goes to the bass. But you're right. Alex really had a unique sound on this album. And I think it might have been one of the first albums where he was really kind of, I hate to use the word equal, but it was the first album that I can remember where I wasn't just laughing and giggling at how ridiculously good Geddy's bass was, or, his guitar just really had a strong presence and was kind of all three instruments together. I think I had made that note earlier, was that, this was a 3-piece band mixed on top of some quiet synth that every once in a while will fill in and accentuate the vocals a little bit, right? So
yeah,
on the tour, they toured on this album. I thought they went longer than this, but I guess they didn't. They toured from October of 91, so less than like a month, or about a month after the album was released. And they toured through July of 92. And Zack and I looked it up, dude. We saw them June 17th, 1992 at Great Woods. And I've got the stub to prove it.
Wow.
It was the first Rush show for both of us. And we would get to enjoy 23 more years of seeing the band live in concert. And then I was thinking back, combined, I feel like you and I have attended at least one show on every tour that followed the Roll the Bones tour. All the way up to their R40 farewell tour, which was in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
Which,
yeah, of which I went to the very last one here in LA at the Forum. Yeah. So there it was, like, man? June 17th, 2022 to, I'm going to look this up because June
17th, 92, right? Was that what you meant to say?
92. Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. 92. And so 2015 was their last show at the Forum.
Yeah.
And their very last show together. And it was August 15th, 2015. So that was their last concert ever that I went to at the Forum with Neil. And so July 17th to 92 to August 15th, 2015.
Would you say that was, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but would you say that was the best? Take out that was their last show. Would you say that was the best Rush show you ever saw?
What made that show so cool two things come to mind. One, I didn't get the best ticket. Well, three things. I'll start with how I got it. I remember, so Oliver, my oldest son, was about a year old. And my wife was pregnant with our second son. And I remember thinking and not finding anybody to go to that show with me. And, we're sort of amidst, early childhood life of not having time to do this or that and just being in that world and wondering, should I go to this? Am I able to like get out one night and go to this? And I remember finding someone selling one ticket on Craigslist for pretty cheap. And I called him and I'm like, yeah, I really want to go to this concert, could be Rush's, well, it's their farewell, not their farewell tour, but it was whatever.
Rumors were flying that it was going to be their last, but I don't think it had.
Right? Yeah, it was kind of out there. Obviously, we didn't know anything about Neil, but it was out there. You're right. And that's why that was part of my incentive. And I'm like, I got it, And I remember this guy telling me on the phone, and I was like, yeah, I got one kid. I got another kid on the way. And I remember him saying, oh, you got to go to this concert, man. I'm coming over. I'm selling you this ticket. And I just remember like a few minutes later, this guy knocking on my door. And he's like, here you go, man. You got to go tonight. Like, and he was just like connecting with, and I'm like, all right, I'm going. So I went on my own. I bought this guy's single ticket, went on my own. It was not a great seat. It was way in the back, but the LA Forum is pretty small and the sound is great.
Right. Yeah.
I was in the back.
Cool venue.
And I was just having the time of my life. And I remember maybe about halfway through the concert, I don't know if I ever told you the story. This guy walks up to me and he goes, and I had my old Rush, like show of hands shirt. I was like, clearly like a huge, and he's like, dude, you look like you're really into this. I have this ticket and I'm not going to be staying for the rest of the concert, but here you go. Here's my ticket. And I'm like, in the midst of the moment, I was like, maybe it's whatever, like another ticket in the same section. And I'm like, great, I get to, I was like, all right, thanks, man. Jamming out, right? The song ends. I look at the ticket and it's like way down there, like near the stage, like right in the first level, right above the floor. And so I'm like, oh my gosh. And so I walk and I take this stub down there and I get down and I watch the rest of the concert at this guy's seat right above the floor. And so that was awesome. And but then the concert itself was so cool the way they constructed it because they went back in time.
They did. They started with, their most recent album, Clockwork Angels. They played 4 or 5 songs off that. And then there were no repeats from the album after that. And then they just went album by album by album. In many cases, they could only do one song from some of the albums because there's so freaking many of them. Yeah.
And they played Cygnus too. They played on that.
I was just going to say that it was, I looked it up. Some of the highlights were Xanadu, The Camera Eye, Cygnus X1, Books 1 and 2, which blew my mind. And then one of the biggest shockers of the night to me, was Jacob's Ladder, which I had never, ever heard live. And I just never thought in a million years they would pull that out. I think I had heard everything else at some point in some sort of melody. Remember in the 90s when they would do like a melody, they would start with 2112 and they would like do a little bit of this song and a little bit of that song. And, they'd kind of do like a little melody sandwich, which was so cool. And they'd end up getting in a lot of pieces of different songs because they had so many. But on this night, no melodies. It was the songs all the way through. And I mean, the fact that they did Cygnus Books 1 and 2. So you got to see Neil's last drum solo ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, boy, am I glad I went to that concert. And what are the chances that I'd be living in LA, I know, about to have my second kid and they're playing their last show ever. And this would happen, and I'd be given a ticket and watch it right there in the Forum. It was amazing. I had the time of my life and I loved it. And I'm so glad I went. And yeah, it's a great kind of thing to end on or just wrap up in a way, like just the journey that they've taken us on and, going from this first tour, Roll the Bones, to this last show that I went to, in between so many amazing Rush concerts and experience listening to Rush and the impact that they had on us, our life, but also, playing music. I certainly wouldn't have picked up the bass if I hadn't heard Geddy Lee and the bass solo on Free Will, and such a massive impact that this band has had on our life. Yeah.
It's
you know,
bittersweet, right? It's
Mhm.
now when I listen to the band, thankfully, more often than not, 95% of the time, brings back a lot of happy memories. Or I'm just in the moment and I'm listening to something. But sometimes I find myself turning it off mid-song because I get emotional about, just the fact that Neil's gone. And although this might sound silly to some people who are listening to this who aren't Rush fans, there's an attachment that you have to an artist that helped change your life. And when they're gone, even though you weren't necessarily personal friends with them, you really feel like this piece is gone. We'll never see the band. I mean, they're gonna do what like Zeppelin did pretty much. They're never gonna play again. They're like, we can't play again. And there's a lot of other bands that kind of did the same thing. But so it's bittersweet, but I'm glad to get to do things like this with you. And again, I have to give you the credit. This was your idea. And I hesitated for several months when I started albumreview.net to even do a Rush album because I was trying to be a lot more casual about, how I felt about certain things. And I was like, what am I talking about? Like, this is how I feel. And I want to have people on, so I want to do reviews in the future of other albums that I might not necessarily be like super passionate about, but I want to hear somebody else's experience. And really, the reason for all this is to get you, the listener, to maybe take a chance, right? Going back to the theme of the album, take a chance and listen to it. And, maybe you only lose a couple minutes, but maybe you find another good song that sticks in your head. My son Danny just recently discovered the song Center Field by John Fogerty. And now he goes around, it's been for like a week straight. Put me in, coach. I'm ready to play.
That's awesome.
And he's going around and it's like, I'm so happy because it's like the first song he's been singing that's, written before 2021. Well, I wanted to, in closing, in memory of someone that we recently lost, Jerry Springer, I wanted to do a final thought, which he did at the end of all of his shows. If I remember correctly, it was called Final Thought. Yeah, the final thought.
Yeah.
So I know for many out there, Rush is an acquired taste. There aren't many who kind of like the band. You either love them or you hate them. I think that's been clear to me. But I'm so grateful the element of chance played a part in turning me on to the band. Because of this, I enjoyed decades of hard-thumping, tight-sounding, melodic music that made me consistently check my heart to ensure it wasn't going to jump straight out of my chest. And because of this, I developed friendships with other Rush fans around the world and grew an even deeper bond with you, Zack. And so for those people out there, like I was saying, I invite you to take a chance, listen to Rush. I don't think you'll be disappointed, but if you decide it's not for you, at least you took the chance, right?
Absolutely. Well said. Well said.
Thanks for listening to the albumreview.net podcast, and thanks to my dear friend Zack Stoff for joining me. If you're interested in any of the albums or books that I've discussed in this episode or previous episodes, go to albumreview.net and pick up a copy of your own. Listen to all my podcast album reviews at albumreview.net by clicking on the podcast tab. They can also be heard wherever podcasts are available. Please follow the show on your preferred platform so you can get regular updates on new episodes. And also, I mentioned this at the top of the episode, if you guys would be so kind as to pop a quick review or rate the podcast, that action right there, just a 2-second action, helps move the needle and get the word out there. I do want to hear from you too. Please email me your feedback, any album review requests, or any questions you might have to gpotters@albumreview.net. That's GPOTTERS at albumreview.net. If you'd like to get regular updates on reviews, interviews, product, and music news, go to the homepage and join the mailing list. You can also visit our YouTube page and stay tuned for updates on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. You can find me at albumreview.net on those platforms. All right, I'm done here, so check you later, guys.
Guess we'll see you around. Check you later. Hey, man, get off my case.
Take a trip down by the highway. Take a trip down by the highway. Take a trip down by the highway. Take a trip down by the highway.